You may know her as Blag Hag, Jennifer McCreight. If you don't know then how to pronounce it correctly, it's Jennifer McCreight. She has recently started a bit of firestorm invading the boys club, and so she's here to talk today about a new movement focused on social justice and atheism called Atheism Plus. So, Jennifer McCreight.
Thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about something I'm sure you've heard nothing about recently, sexism. It's become a bit of a hot button issue within the atheist movement, which is a massive understatement. It's more like a molten lava center of the sun issue. But before I talk about that, I want to give a little background about my role in the atheist movement and my past as an activist within the atheist movement, because I think it gives sort of a lot of context with my personal story, what I've been dealing with, and what other women and other people have been dealing with in the atheist movement. So I first got involved when I was a freshman at Purdue University in undergrad in Indiana. I started the Society of Non-Theists, which was a group for secular students on campus where we could meet and gather. Indiana, fairly religious state, fairly conservative campus, even though it's a public school. And it really galvanized me into caring about the atheist movement, because I felt like the only atheist on campus. And you know, I had people telling me I was going to hell all the time. I had one person ask me how I would ever get a husband if I was an atheist. There were all sorts of stereotypes out there that I really wanted to combat on campus. So that was an affiliate of the Secular Student Alliance, which I then got involved with more after I graduated. I'm the vice chair of the board of directors for the Secular Student Alliance. And I also started blogging around 3 years ago, mainly originally to talk about what my atheist group was doing on campus and our activities and sort of some of the religious issues that were going on in India at the time. And it sort of took off. I really didn't plan it to. I wasn't going out with the goal to be a popular atheist blogger. I was more bored and I liked writing. And all this time, I felt really welcome in the atheist movement. I felt like people appreciated the activism that I was doing, that I finally found a space where I felt welcome and secure and safe in this community, that I was no longer being barraged with sort of this religious anti-atheist thinking. But that's until I said the word feminism. This all started happening of a little thing called boobquake. Is anyone here not familiar with it? Because I can briefly describe it. All right, a couple people. So I accidentally created a meme that went viral on the internet called boobquake. What happened was there was a Muslim cleric in Iran who said that immodestly dressed women cause earthquakes. And yes, and that was kind of my response. I kind of giggled at it, and I said, oh man, someone making some silly claim yet again. But I'm like, this is a testable hypothesis, you know? If we dress immodestly, we can see if we're actually causing earthquakes. So tongue-in-cheek, I said, we're going to pick this day, it'll be a boobquake, I'll show some cleavage on that day, and you can join me if you want, and we'll see if we actually increase the amount of earthquakes or not. And, you know, it was originally envisioned as sort of an empowering event. It was supposed to support women's freedoms to dress how they want without saying that they're murdering people. And it was also to call out dangerous superstitious thinking and say, you know, we can question these things, we can address them. This isn't outside of the realm of science. We can address religious claims. But unfortunately, it basically devolved into show us your tits. It really made me wake up, because I had always been one of those people who considered themselves a feminist, but kind of figured we had already solved everything already, that women were already totally equal. And when I got this kind of response, much of it from atheists, it was really shocking. I received sexual invitations from strangers around the country during this. Whenever I appeared or spoke at atheist events after this, I was just flooded with comments about my appearance, my chest, sexual comments. Since then, I've been repeatedly told that I can never speak out against objectifying things or sexual harassment, because making a joke about my boobs was eternal consent, that it made people free to comment about me whenever they wanted. And it got so bad that, honestly, I had to stop mentioning boobquake in talks. This is one of the first times I've mentioned it in a long time. I turned down a lot of speaking invitations who just wanted me to talk about boobquake, because every time I brought it up, it just opened up a new flood of harassment that I experienced, that people thought that it was okay to treat me that way and kind of missed the main goal of the event. And so that kind of galvanized me into speaking about issues of feminism and sexism more in the atheist movement, from an atheist perspective. I care about feminism and diversity and social justice, and I thought messages like, please stop sexually harassing me, would be simple for skeptics and rationalists to understand. But unfortunately, I was naive. I kind of went into the atheist movement thinking that atheists were maybe smarter or more skeptical about everything in their life, which would include sexism, but I found a lot of people who had a really negative pushback. And really it got predictable. On my blog, every time I even mentioned feminism in passing, every post would devolve into hundreds and hundreds of comments, most of them very hateful. They accused me of man-hating, castrating, trying to kill people's sexualities, which is ironic because I'm a very sex-positive feminist. They said I was humorless, that I was ugly, that I was an overreacting harpy, and other words that I will not repeat for the purpose of this talk. And the fortunate thing is, as this kept happening, it wasn't limited to my personal experiences in the movement. It wasn't just happening to me. And because I was sort of becoming a public figure and people knew this was happening to me, a lot of people kept coming to me with their own stories about how they were being treated online in atheist communities or even in their in-person atheist communities. When I first was going to my first big atheist convention, the ones with, kind of big name, famous celebrity speakers, really exciting, and I posted that on my blog that I was going. And independently, without me prompting or asking for advice, I had a dozen people email me telling me certain speakers to avoid at the conference, because I was a young woman going, and they thought I was going to be preyed upon because of the past behavior of these speakers. And the more involved I got, the more these same names kept popping up, and I realized there's sort of this underground network of women who are telling each other to be cautious around because they felt like they couldn't come out and say it and that no one would actually take their concerns seriously. And I brought this up at the Women in Secularism conference in Washington, D.C. in May, and one of the things that came out of it was I proposed, and so did others, that maybe we should put anti-sexual harassment policies into our convention policies. And that, one, if these things happen more, we can document it and actually have that evidence so we're not making any false claims. And maybe it would actually discourage a lot of people from acting that way, knowing that we're watching, that we're looking out for it, that we don't want this kind of behavior in our community. And people shat themselves with rage at that suggestion. They went nuts. They saw it again as some feminazi trying to castrate male sexuality, policing behavior, not making an environment welcome to women in the conferences. And it went so far that DJ Grothy, president of JREF, blamed the feminist bloggers for the drop in TAM's women attendance, because we were scaring women away, saying there's a problem at conferences, instead of addressing why women were getting scared away or why we were talking about these issues to begin with, instead of trying to come up with some sort of solution. And it's really just gotten worse and worse over time. We have big name figures like Paula Kirby coming out and saying that we're feminazis and femistasis. The online community is particularly bad. A lot of in-person groups are doing a great job. But I mean, a 14-year-old girl posted a photo of herself holding a Carl Sagan book to the Reddit Atheism subreddit, and she got a flood of rape jokes in return. Flood. That was basically all the comments. The Amazing Atheist, who's a very popular YouTube atheist video blogger, he purposely tried to trigger a rape survivor into having a horrible reaction because he thought it was funny to try to do that. And it's gotten to the point where there's a group of people out there who are really obsessively devoted to slandering me and people associated with me and anyone who's really a feminist atheist or talking about sexism or diversity. So I'm part of the Free Thought blogging network. I blog at Blag Hag in particular. But the blog network as a whole has been attacked, even if people never write about feminism. People are constantly photoshopping us in very embarrassing and lewd ways to try to silence us. We had Thunderfoot, popular video blogger as well, gain unauthorized access to our private email listserv after he thought that basically we were too feminist. And it contains a lot of personal information because it was supposed to be totally private. People announced medical details, anonymous bloggers had their real names out there, and it was a serious issue. And it's gone so far that multiple people have actually threatened to contact my employer with evidence that I'm a bad scientist because I'm a feminist, because they want to destroy my job. Because I am a grad student in my day job. This is just a hobby for me, dealing with all this stuff. And it's getting to the point where anyone who's just associated with us feminist atheists are fair game. Surly Amy Roth, you may be familiar with, she makes these lovely necklaces that I see some of you are also wearing. People have been trying to destroy her business because of this, because she's associated with the outspoken feminist atheists. It's gone so far that a fellow activist, Justin Bakula, publicly posted her home address and the photo of her address online to one of these hate forums that's dedicated to attacking us. One blogger who describes her blog as rejecting the Watson-Myers doctrine ridiculed skeptical teen activist Reese Morgan, who's from the UK and has done a lot of great skeptical activism, and he's a feminist ally, so that made him a target. They ridiculed him for flunking his exams because he has severe physical and mental illnesses. They ridiculed him because he dares to support the atheists who also speak out against sexism. And the biggest example of all, I mean, a year ago, Rebecca Watson said, "Guys, please don't do that," and she's still receiving daily rape and death threats, most of which are from the atheist community. And it's sad because this was a movement that made me feel so welcome when I first joined. It made me feel so safe. And I feel like now that was an accident, that I was never really welcome, but it just took me a while to bring up the word feminism, and I was already in before I dared to say that. And now that I've opened my big fat feminist mouth, people are trying to push me, and others like me, back out. And one of the things that people often say when they're trying to do this is that dealing with sexism, diversity, feminism is mission drift. That it has nothing to do with atheism or skepticism, and that we're somehow sullying atheism by talking about issues of equality. And I don't want good causes like secularism and skepticism to die because we're infested with people who think that way. We're infested with people who don't care about equality and don't care about how women are treated and are sometimes the ones who are giving out that awful treatment. And a lot of the motives for this are people who kind of, we like to call dictionary atheists, the ones who think that the only thing we have in common is not believing in gods. That's all an atheist is, and so if you talk about anything else like feminism, that it's just not what the word means, so you're wrong. And they go so far that sometimes they say it's irrelevant and damaging to atheism to have it associated with these other topics. And I guess that's an okay argument if you're not organized, like if you're not in a atheist group, you're not commenting online in communities, you're not already participating. But honestly, it's kind of nonsensical when people in the movement say that. Because just think of all the things we do that have nothing to do with the dictionary definition of atheism. What does atheism have to say about gathering together and talking about topics? Why have groups meet at all? Why have any of these conferences? And we're always talking about things like separation of church and state. Not necessarily an atheist issue. You can be an atheist and not agree with that. You can be religious and agree with that. We talk about logic and philosophy all the time. We talk about how atheists should know logical arguments and fallacies in order to debate religion better. But it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with atheism. There are logical atheists out there who know nothing about logical fallacies. It doesn't stem from atheism. We talk about science and evolution all the time. We have no problem coming out as strong supporters of evolution and celebrating things like Darwin Day and debunking creationism. It technically doesn't have anything to do with atheism, but we come together with that as a common value that most of us share. So why don't dictionary atheists argue against these things? Well, they're less controversial within our community. Most of us will agree that science is good, logic is good, separation of church and state is good. But when you start talking about feminism or sexism, it starts to fall apart and you get more contentious ideas. But I think feminism, sexism, and other social justice ideas belong in this movement just as much as science and logic and the separation of church and state. For one, if we're claiming to be skeptical and rational, we need to apply that to everything. We can't just choose to apply that to religion and stop. What's the point of throwing out the garbage bag of religion and leave the trash of sexism stinking up the room? What's the point of that? And I think a lot of atheists, they think they're doing this, they think they're skeptical of sexist claims, because they're often very good at getting the important issues right. The really big cases of sexism that are the most egregiously harmful or irrational, like female genital mutilation. It's fairly non-controversial within our movement that we agree that's kind of a bad thing. But they often stop there. And I see it much like the Christians who may reject the 6,000-year-old earth or reject justifications for slavery in the Bible, but they still believe in the divinity of Jesus or the existence of God. You know, the belief in God alone, if that was all they were doing, it's not particularly harmful, but it's foundational to the kind of thinking that supports the viler beliefs. And sexual or casual sexism is no different. When you have these sort of microaggressions and all these little things, they add up. They get really wearisome, and they also reinforce the bigger problems. To put it into context that I think most atheists would understand or be familiar with, you know, people in the US can and do say things like, we're obviously a Christian nation. Look, we God and trust in God we trust on our money. You know, therefore we don't have separation of church and state, so quit your atheist whining. We see lots of examples like this where they'll turn to one little quote from a politician and use that as proof. And maybe that one little quote, or God we trust on our money, isn't the biggest problem we face in the US. I'd rather have child daycare services have to follow, religious services have to follow the same regulations as other child daycare services. That's much more important to me. But you have to fight the little things too in order to get rid of the big institutionalized problem. And the same thing applies to sexism. When someone makes a really mild sexist remark, that reinforces the greatest sexist culture, and it makes it more difficult to address those important issues. And we don't have to look far back in our history for a perfect example. The stereotype of women being too emotional was one of the key arguments against allowing women to vote. And that wasn't even 100 years ago. That was within the last century. And I think there's some atheists who are on board, but they shut down when you point out this stuff or point out privilege that maybe men have, or white people have, or straight people have, and I can go on and on. Because they don't like that concept that they consider themselves good people. And they usually are, they're usually fine. And they see sexists as bad people. And so when you point out something they did was sexist or problematic, they automatically think you're wrong because they know they're a good person and only bad people do those things. And I think also they feel like, you know, privilege means that you got help somehow, and that, no, I did everything for myself. I'm not actively being sexist against women. What have I personally done to be sexist against women? And it's not about that. It's about knowing that no one's perfect, and that it takes time to give up sexist beliefs, just like any other irrational belief. I mean, show of hands, who in the room used to be religious at some point in time? Okay, almost all of you. And how many of you stopped being religious after one rational argument that you heard about religion? Yeah, no one. and sexism is the same way, just like any irrational belief, that it takes time, and it takes a lot of time and effort to get rid of that belief, just like we had to take time and effort to get rid of religious belief. But the unfortunate thing is, I think there's another group of atheists. And I think this is a very small group, but they're very vocal, especially online. And I think there are atheists who are more interested in using examples of sexism as a tool to attack religion than as a reason to help women. That they make atheism their primary interest because it's really the only persecuted minority they're a part of and the only one they relate to, and therefore they see it as the most important issue that they could deal with. It's the only one that personally affects them. But I care about LGBT issues, I care about race, I'm straight and I'm white, and I think the reasons why I care about those issues, despite it not personally affecting me, is because of my atheism. I feel like my social justice stems from my atheism, and I'm not just a dictionary atheist. Even if we're not assuming that all atheists are skeptical and want to be skeptical of sexism like we're skeptical of religion, God not existing has consequences. I mean, God is such a huge part of our culture and our way of thinking, religion, organized religion, that when you take God out of the equation, that has consequences for your everyday life. I see it that there's no one up in the sky taking care of the poor, the weak, the less fortunate. There's no one who's going to dole out justice and punish people who are evil or misbehaving. There's no justice in the afterlife. So we have to do it now. And I don't just mean atheists, I mean people. Humans have to take care of each other now because there's no divine being taking care of each other. And that's where my social justice comes from, knowing that no one's taking care of us. So all these things have been getting to me lately as sort of the harassment's been amping up as we've been talking about sexism within the atheist community. So I wrote a post sort of discussing these ideas and why we should care more about social justice. And out of this came the idea of what's now being called Atheism Plus. That it's time for a wave that cares about how religion affects everyone and that applies skepticism to everything. And that includes social issues like sexism, racism, politics, poverty, crime. That we can criticize religion and irrational thinking just as unabashedly as we have before, and just as publicly. But we need to stop exempting ourselves from that criticism. That we need to be able to apply that sort of critical thinking to everything in our lives, not just one particular topic. And I think the reason why sort of the Atheism Plus label came up, I did not create it, a commenter did, I don't want to take credit for that, was that we're more than dictionary atheists, at least some of us, and the ones of us who are, we want to show that to people. We want to see that we're atheists, plus we're skeptics, plus we're humanists, plus we care about social justice. And I think it's very natural to make that connection, because there's so many aspects of the world where religion directly affects these sort of issues. I mean, there's religious opposition to gay marriage, opposition to birth control. There's so much religious guilt about sexuality. There's been the historic religious support for racism and slavery. The Catholic Church even moves some of their child molesting priests to poor minority communities on purpose. And then there are things like faith healing and other shams that they prey on the disabled or the mentally ill, and they're not getting secular evidence-based treatment. And these are all issues we should care about. I don't see that as mission drift. I see that as perfectly fitting within the atheist movement. And the whole idea of moving past this in Atheism Plus is that it also gets us out of the so-called negativity trap. That, you know, I'm sure some of you have heard, what do you atheists do when you get together? You just sit around not praying and talk about what you don't believe in? No, there are things we care about, and I've already discussed some of these. We care about science, we care about logic, we care about education often, and we're just adding things to this list, that some of us care about more of these issues. So, on that vein, we've started atheismplus.com, which is going to be home for educational resources such as linking to other organizations that already are doing these things, since this isn't a new idea. I've been Atheism Plus for years, just now that there's a word for it. We also want to include helpful advice on how to make your groups more diverse and inclusive, including tips on being proactive. Because a lot of groups don't feel like they're scaring away minorities or women, but there are a lot of subtle things that you're subconsciously doing that contribute to that. If all of your leadership and all of your speakers are male, and your conference lineup is all guys, a woman who's not already involved might look at that and be like, ooh, why is that? Am I not welcome? Is there something weird going on that's keeping the ladies away? There might not actually be anything weird going on, but it gives that sort of image. Or, you know, if every event you have is in a pub, people under 21 can't come, or people with small children can't come. If you're having a huge conference and there's no childcare, it's usually the mom who gets left behind and can't go. And just things like that where if we really want to make groups more inclusive, we can do these things. And one more aspect of the Atheism Plus website I want to plug, since I think it's important, is we have a big forum that's already very active. It's going to be highly moderated, so we can get away from some of these threats and harassment. and we can get away from some of the people who are trying to silence us. You know, it's frustrating when we want to talk about certain issues and we're not trying to force other people to also talk about them, but that we can't even have those discussions because people will just sweep in and say so many hateful things or just even question why you're even talking about it in the first place. You can never have a calm discussion about things like sexism. So it's going to be highly moderated, and we also have an educational subforum where you can ask introductory questions without sort of the vets getting worn out. Because I know from my point of view, sometimes I get sick having to answer the really basic questions over and over again that I see as sort of like introductory feminism. And so we have that so the people who want to calmly give answers to people can do so. Hopefully they'll create us more allies instead of more enemies who have a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions about who we are. And, you know, I understand not everyone's going to agree. A lot of people see this as political, as super progressive, and that atheism is apolitical, and that shouldn't be dealing with these things. But the response has been pretty vile. There has been a lot of positive response, and I'll go back to that in a bit. But there's a vocal minority that has been very vile. I've woken up lately to a flood of tweets and emails and comments about how I'm dogmatic, a cult, that I hate old white men, that I'm an exclusionary hate monger, I'm a feminazi, I'm a cunt, I'm a retard. I get this every day now because I want a community where I can talk about issues I care about, not because I want to force people to talk about them. And some say I'm changing the definition of atheism, and this is why they're so upset. That they're those dictionary atheists that only care about there not being God, discussing his existence, maybe separation of church and state. And I think those discussions are super important. Discussing why God doesn't exist, flaws in theological arguments, stigma against atheists, religious privilege, violations of separation of church and state, all those things really, really matter. I mean, I know when I was in Indiana, that's mostly what my club talked about, especially because we're in an environment that was so anti-atheist and so stereotypical about atheists. And it was incredibly important for me to have that sort of network when I was in a conservative religious state like Indiana. And so I think groups should keep doing that. I don't think this idea of being a social justice activist, atheist, or caring about atheism plus means you can't talk about that. I think we need to keep talking about it. But I'm ready to expand my list of topics. I think there's more to the world than debating if God exists or not. I think there's more important issues than that in the long run. I mean, I'd rather be allies with someone who believes in God, but is a wonderful human being and cares about social justice issues and fights for that, than someone who's an atheist and is making slurs against me online. So honestly, I don't really think it's about the label. I don't think it's about atheism plus or social justice atheists or anything like that. I think it's about getting stuff done. But people still think it's divisive. They think that because we're going and forming our own group, or because we want to talk about these issues in a space that's safe, that we're somehow dividing and therefore destroying the atheist movement. That because we're excluding people, we are the true bigots. But you know, you can't be inclusive to misogynists and also women. You can't be inclusive to racists and also racial minorities. You can't be inclusive to homophobes and LGBT individuals. I'm choosing to exclude the people I wouldn't invite over for dinner. I'm excluding people who are spewing nothing but hate and trying to silence other people from having discussions. And the funny thing about all this is, I look back at the kind of experiences I've had over the last couple of years, and I think we're the divisive ones. What about all those people who are sending rape threats to the 15-year-old girl? What about all those people who are sending me messages every morning about I'm a feminazi cunt? I'm the divisive one? I feel like they've been actively trying to push us out of the movement, and I think it's okay to say, hey, you don't want us? We're going to go take our ball and play somewhere else and have fun and do what we want to do. And, you know, that's really what it is. Getting a group of like-minded people together where we can go and not be harassed. No one bothers the Secular Student Alliance because they only cater to students. They don't say that that's mission drift because it's only one topic. If I started an atheist knitting club or bowling league, no one would say that that's mission drift that has nothing technically to do with atheism, just because I want to hang out with people. They're not saying we have to cancel every atheist pizza night that we have across the country. And honestly, if you wanted to form a libertarian atheist group, or what conservative atheist group, or what have you, have fun. Go do it, go make one. I'm just personally not going to join. And I think that's totally fine. I don't feel like you have to participate in this discussion or you're a bad person. I mean, I'm not a member of the Sierra Club, but that doesn't mean I hate the environment. I think it's just that, again, we want that space. And I do think this is important. Obviously, I'd be happier if more people were involved and if everyone wanted to do it, because, you know, you believe in something, it's because you think you're right. So I think that this is important, because I think it's going to make our movement stronger by making the movement more welcoming to more people. When you have more people, that's more money in your atheist group, that's more voices, that's more power to change politics that's against atheists, or just to change the public perception of atheists. And having multiple perspectives can make us more informed on issues. I don't know how many times I've heard people ask, why are women or black people more religious? Because it just seems so nonsensical to them, and they come up with some sort of explanation like, well, they just must be more rational. They're just not as good as science. No, why don't you try asking a woman or a black person why their communities tend to be more religious, or the motivation behind that? Because it's often complicated, and if you're not personally living the life of a woman or a black person, you often don't see what it's like in those communities, and you don't know what it's like in the motivations for being religious. So having those sort of voices in our community add to our understanding of why people become religious, and that doesn't seem like a bad thing to me at all. And I do have to say that after calling for a new wave of atheism, or atheism plus, or whatever you want to call it, being social justice minded, hundreds of people who never participated or who had given up on participating were suddenly excited again. I have to say, this is the first time in my life I wrote a post about feminism, and out of the first 500 comments, 495 were positive. It was shocking to me. And it was all people who said, I had never wanted to get involved because I saw this stuff happening, or I never wanted to get involved because atheism alone wasn't interesting to me. It was social justice that spoke to me. Or I gave up being involved because I was so burnt out on dealing with these people who hate social justice, but now they're active. And just in under 2 weeks, we already have over 1,300 people in our forums posting over 8,000 messages discussing all these issues they care about. People are trying to organize local groups to start doing activism in person and not just on the internet. And that's really heartening to me, to know this many people care. And so I think, even though there are people who've been hateful, it's worth it that we have this group now, so those of us who care can start doing things about it. But again, there's a group of people out there who are devoted to hating this concept, who are devoted to hating me, and who are devoted to hating feminism or anything close to it. If you want to learn more, Google the ironic term FT bullies to find them. And these people have been bullying us for a long time to try to silence us. Every time I write something, I wake up to find abusive comments in my inbox. How I'm a slut and a prude, how I'm ugly, fat, feminazi, retard, bitch, cunt, just to name a few. Every morning I wake up to that. And if I block these people who are either twisting my words, quote mining me, or calling me these slurs, I get the same stuff, but then they add that I also hate freedom of speech. Because obviously the Constitution forces everyone to make me listen to them on Twitter. You know, that's right in there somewhere between one of the amendments, I'm not sure. And just the other day, when I woke up, I had to delete dozens and dozens of comments of a person who was imitating my identity on my blog, making graphic, lewd, degrading sexual comments about my personal life. That they were pretending to be me and talking about all the terrible, nasty things I like to do. And people on my blog believed it was me because they were able to copy my email, to copy my image, and they're out there to slander me. And honestly, I'm getting to the point where I'm worried this abuse will spread to my loved ones, to my boyfriend, to my family, to my friends. It's already spread to some of my friends, other bloggers and activists who are out there. And I look back and I think back to Boobquake, which is sort of the original wake-up call to all of this. And I think back to how I was originally so scared that I had criticized a Muslim cleric and it went viral, which I didn't expect, that maybe there'd be a call out for my head, or some Muslim extremist might attack me, because you see stuff like that happen. Everyone draw Muhammad Day, the person who came up with that had to change her name and move to a different city. I was scared something like that was going to happen to me, that it would always be the religious extremists who would come after me as a vocal atheist. And when that happened, I had one death threat. It was on 4chan and was not serious. If anyone knows what 4chan is, you can understand. And it wasn't from a religious person. But I never expected that the things that made me scared for my well-being would be from other atheists. I never expected that those would be the people that I have to worry about coming to one of these events and doing something, or finding out where I live and doing something. So I actually recently said I was going to take a break from blogging. I'm still going to do stuff like this. I'm still active with the Secular Student Alliance. I'm still active in getting all the Atheism Plus forums back. And I'll be back. I like writing too much. I'm too much of a masochist that even though I deal with this sort of stuff, these issues mean too much to me to give up permanently, even though we see this happening all the time. And not necessarily in the atheist community, but feminist bloggers often have to just quit because they can't deal with the kind of hate they get online. And it really brings you down having to deal with those things every day. Even if you know maybe it's just 10 people out there, or even if you know it's not true. It really affects your psyche and affects your ability to deal with this stuff. So, I should add, even though I said I was taking a break, these people who are vocal, they basically did a victory lap around me. They said it was a publicity stunt. I mentioned in my post that I deal with depression frequently, and that these sort of experiences trigger that sometimes. It makes it really hard to stay positive and stay happy about my life when people are saying these things. And they said that I really don't suffer from that, it's a publicity stunt, that this proves that they win. But I think it illustrates why we need to start caring about social justice issues, and why we need a safe space like Atheism Plus. And I hope that I'm like a hydra, that you can cut me down, but 100 of new voices will spring back up louder than ever, that 100 new atheist feminist blogs will take to the internet, or better yet, that 100 Atheism Plus groups will pop up around the world and be ready to fight social justice and march in gay pride parades and lend their time to women's groups. But if we claim to be rationalists and skeptics, we should apply that to all areas of our life, not just the most convenient or the most obvious or self-serving. Thanks. And I do have a lot of time for questions. I wanted to leave a lot because this is obviously a very interesting, nuanced, controversial issue, so I want to be able to talk to people a lot. So, yeah.
It seems to me you have found the answer in forming another group, the Atheist Plus. I mean, I think of this as a whole person matter, you know, a mental health issue even, and because there will always be special interest focus. Atheists who are more interested in politics, atheists who are interested in feminism or other kinds of issues. But I'm wondering, what about the sort of umbrella atheist, you know, the David Silvermans, the national leadership for atheism being inclusive of these various issues without maybe requiring, if you're an atheist, you must then share all these other interests, because I'm not sure that would ever work. But at the same time, discouraging quite vocally the hate and the examples that you're talking about that are so despicable, really.
I feel like there should be some baseline that everyone could agree upon, that the sort of hatred where people are making slurs or saying really awful things to people, not acceptable no matter what your political beliefs are. And I would also include that issues of diversity are something that all national organizations should care about making their groups inclusive, because it hurts you if you don't do that. we've long had an image problem as atheists that whenever it's in the news, you see Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and Dennett. And they're all older white men. And again, there's nothing wrong with being an older white man. But when you see that, and maybe you don't fall into that group, you feel like, is that the only people who participate in atheism? Because that's the only people I'm seeing. And so it turns away a lot of people who would be really great additions to our cause, and would be great activists and great supporters. So I think caring about issues of diversity, like having a diverse speaker lineup, encouraging minorities to take positions of power or lead seminars in your group or volunteer more would be great, especially since multiple studies have shown that women and other minorities tend not to step up for leadership positions because they feel like they're not supposed to do it. That's not what women do. But if you ask them to do it, they do just as good a job as anyone else. So a lot of it's being proactive. And I feel like those basic issues are things that everyone should care about. And there's still people who disagree with me on that. There are people who think freedom of speech is paramount and that you should be able to say whatever you want, whenever you want, which is technically true. I would agree with that. But you have to know there are consequences for that. And when you're choosing to call someone a cunt on a daily basis because you disagree with her, you know, we may choose to not let you participate in that discussion anymore. You can still go start your own blog and say those things, or start your own group and say those things, but we're able to make those value judgments that if you're being hateful, you're not contributing positively to the group. So there are people who are against that. They think that you should be able to say whenever, because it's a slippery slope, and then who decides what's okay and what's not. But I think a lot of the main national organizations are on board with that, are on board with issues of diversity. They may not be perfect all the time, but often they are trying to be better. But yeah, I think that's at least the base minimum that we should all be able to agree upon. But again, that's one of the reasons why I've gotten so much pushback for even saying that, because there are people who, they don't see diversity as an issue, because they see it as tokenism, or we're only including these people, and we want to be colorblind or gender blind and ignore that, and therefore they're better. They're actually the more equal people because they don't see gender or race, and it ignores the fact that gender and race actually does make you get treated very differently in the real world, and that it has real implications, and that there isn't already perfect equality. So we need to be proactive about caring about these things.
How are you feeling about, and I don't know whether or not, I'm admittedly very new to atheism, and so I don't read a lot of blogs. I read occasionally, and the only one that I've seen about stuff is speaking up very vocally against people like this. So I want to know how you're feeling about that and your response.
Jennifer, I'll repeat,
Can you
yeah.
ask people to stand up so we can hear together?
Okay.
Or repeat the question.
People stand up and speak loudly, but I'll repeat the question. She's basically asking how I felt about Richard Dawkins, who has come out a lot negatively about some of the issues I'm talking about. What originally happened, for those who aren't familiar, was a year ago I mentioned Rebecca Watson. Oh boy, lots to recap on this. So basically what happened, she was at a conference where she had spent the whole conference on a panel and in a talk talking about, please don't sexually harass me at conferences, please stop propositioning me, I'm here for academic reasons, I'm not here for you to start dating me or having sex with me. And then at 4 a.m., an attendee of the conference followed her into an elevator and asked her back into the room for coffee. And she made a video about this later, which it was actually an 8-minute long video that talked about lots of other things, and she said one sentence basically saying, guys, don't do that. It made me feel uncomfortable. I'm in this enclosed space with this person I don't know late at night after we've been in the bar, and I just got done saying, don't proposition me this whole time, and then you go and do it. It seemed like a really violation of what she had requested at the conference. And when she wrote about this and the internet exploded about it, predictably, Richard Dawkins made a comment where it started, Dear Muslima, and was talking about the plight of Muslim women and how horrible it was that these basically Western feminists are talking about being uncomfortable in an elevator when the real problem is that Muslim women have to go through all these worse things. And it really diminished her experience and basically said that because someone else has it worse than you, you're never allowed to complain. And unfortunately, he's done some other kind of passive-aggressive things since then. He made some snide remarks about the Hug Me, I'm Vaccinated campaign, which is also run by skeptics associated with Rebecca Watson, because apparently it's okay to talk about hugs then, but you could never hug anyone else, which is not what we're saying. Recently, he retweeted a comment made by a woman who said, well, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact tweet, that I've never experienced sexism in the atheist community, so I don't know where these women are getting it from, implying that we're either making it up or overreacting, and he's supportive of that as well. He also made a recent comment saying how bloggers are just gunning up controversy for no reason to get more hits on their blogs. They probably make money that way. And how do I feel about that? Disappointed. Richard Dawkins was one of my heroes. Reading The God Delusion is what made me an atheist. I grew up in a secular family, but I was a deist for a while, agnostic, and sitting down and reading his book was what made me go, oh wow, not only am I an atheist, but I should care about this. I should go talk about these issues, and talking about how religion's wrong is really important. And I still think he's great for that. I mean, I think he's great at articulating the problems about religion. But I won't be buying his feminist books anytime soon, I guess is what I should say. No, it's disappointing. I think it illustrates why you shouldn't put people up on a pedestal, because no one's perfect. No one that you look up to is going to agree with you on everything or understand where you're coming from. So yeah, it does kind of hurt, because I've met him a lot of times, and mostly before feminism came up, he was always very friendly to me and always took the time to talk about my recent genetics project or my activism. But it is disappointing knowing someone who's, I would say, we don't have official leaders in this movement, but he's kind of the main figure of atheism. And knowing that he kind of sees me as derailing atheism or having irrelevant ideas or having ideas that somehow it doesn't matter that I'm constantly getting harassed every time I write about this from the atheist community. Yeah, it's disappointing. I would have hoped he had learned something from Elevator Gate a year ago when this happened. I actually defended him a lot, even though I was one of the initial people to criticize his post, because I said, like I said, it takes time to change your mind about these sort of issues. He's a very public figure, and he made a very public statement, and it's hard to come back from that and say, hey, I was wrong, or I changed my mind. It's really hard to admit that you're wrong, and it's really hard to figure out that you're wrong instantly. But I don't think he's done that yet. Maybe he will eventually. Maybe he still needs more time. Maybe when he sees, hopefully, what good Atheism Plus can do and how it's motivating more people to get involved and still care about the values of atheism, that maybe it'll help change his mind a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. Don't put people on pedestals, because they'll get knocked down. Wear the green shirt. Smiley face.
You said that your idea has been around a long time, but now there's a word for it. It seems to me like the word for it already existed. It's humanism. And if you wanted to make a choice between do I just want to be an atheist or atheist plus, and you wanted to join an organization, just want to be a dictionary definition of atheist, join American Atheists, you want to be atheism plus, you join the American Humanist Association. And that's kind of been like a classic dichotomy with the movement. So my question is, how is atheism plus different than humanism?
Sure. First, I'll reiterate that I don't care what label you use. If you want to call yourself Pastafarian, King Atheist, whatever, just as long as you're doing stuff, then I don't really care. And I would argue that things like American Atheists aren't necessarily dictionary atheists, because they're out there challenging political statements and putting up billboards, and that's not necessarily an atheist thing. But I do think this is slightly different from humanism. I think it's a small distinction. I don't even think it's a worthwhile distinction, which is why I don't care about the label. I'm not going to go around calling myself an atheist pluser. It's just like a website name to me, honestly. But I think the word atheist in the US especially is still seen as confrontational. It's seen as in your face. It's seen as a statement. And I feel like humanists, oftentimes, people don't know what it means, and it sounds way nicer. I know when I was in Indiana, I would use the word humanist a lot because no one knew what it meant, and so they would leave me alone and wouldn't try to like ask me about my atheism anymore. But then I became a little more confrontational, and I wanted to get rid of that stigma attached to atheists, so I wanted to use the label atheist as much as possible. And again, I do feel like my social justice activism stems from my atheism, so I don't really see it as being a misnomer to keep calling myself an atheist. But as for Atheism Plus, yeah, I think humanists are natural allies. I think humanist groups also have to do some introspection. I've had some humanists, obviously not all, tell me that feminism is about man-hating and that we've already achieved equality, so I should use the word humanist instead, because that's the true gender equality term. I've met some humanists who are really xenophobic towards Arabic people or Muslim people because they go beyond criticizing Islam, and they're just kind of scared of all Muslim people as a whole. And I think issues like that are things that humanist communities need to address as well. They still have diversity issues. They still have a lot of the same issues we have. But no, I think humanists are our natural allies. Again, they've been doing Atheism Plus for a long time. I mean, the first people in this movement who were talking back in the early 1900s, they were often suffragists and anti-racist, anti-slavery. So this has been around for a long time. It's really just a call to have the safe space, especially online, to be able to discuss these things, since the environment has just gotten so toxic lately. I don't know if that fully addresses your question about. I'm really not interested in labels too much. I see it more as a convenient way to designate a grassroots movement or a website, but not necessarily a whole new label for yourself. It's just showing that we're like-minded about these certain issues, we care about these certain issues, so we can go to this space and talk about them. That's how I see it. Sure.
How do you confront people who say that adding diversity to like the speaker lineup is repressing old white men?
I sigh. I think a lot of the same speakers keep popping up at lots of different conferences. And for one, having just a diversity of speakers is good because we get to hear about a lot of different topics. We don't have to hear the same person speak about everything. Like, I don't feel like I have to speak at every single conference either. Like, don't invite me to everything. Find some new people to talk about it. But I feel like the main argument is that if we have these new voices talking about new issues that aren't usually addressed, or even just showing that, yes, a black person can come to an atheist meeting, or a woman can come to an atheist meeting, then that will help bring our numbers up and bring our support up and be more inclusive. I really don't see it as excluding men or excluding white guys, because they're still going to be invited to conferences. I'm not saying they never should. It's just that instead of only inviting them, try to branch out and get other people. And a lot of people see that as tokenism, or they see that as somehow you're diluting the quality of the conference by stepping down a notch to get someone else. And all I have to say to that is bullshit. There are a lot of great female speakers out there, a lot of great black speakers, Hispanic, Asian, LGBT. There are a lot of great speakers who represent diversity, and I think they're subconsciously not getting recognized because a lot of them aren't familiar because they're not speaking. So it's one of those things, we're not saying find this person who's never given a talk before and put them on the stage, saying find these people who are already good at this and actually recognize the good they're doing. Questions, sir?
I really, really appreciate what you've done. I really appreciate you being here. As a middle-class white guy who loves having all the privilege that brings me, I also have to live with the shame of what you do. I do what I can, always trying to find new ways, and on a certain level, it just breaks my heart that you have to stand and put up with that shit from my other male brothers, because it's I and my other male brothers like me that need to stand up and tell these bastards to fuck off. I'm not going to put any kind of a label on that because I can get so confused with own journey through this giving up the God thing has been. I really appreciate voices like yours. I have to, there's very much a caretaker part of me, so you might have heard when you were younger, I'm rubber, you're glue, everything you say bounces off me and sticks to you. And in the moment, sometimes it's hard to remember that you're the rubber, and these jerks are the glue. And literally, and my point is, seriously, I'm a therapist, so I have to say this, it's all about them. And the fact that this thing that you're coming to grips with, which has been around since for the past 20,000 years, that men think they're better and that they have better than. So I'm sorry for that, and I'm so glad you're out there and the others. I don't know anything about the blogosphere because I'm too old.
It's probably a good thing.
yeah, I'm going to be very positive probably. But anyway, I just want to say thank you, and it really has to be.
Well, thank you. That means a lot, and I have a couple points to say in response to that. One, I get men emailing me all the time, like apologizing on behalf of their whole gender, and I feel bad because you shouldn't have to do that. I don't think that these couple of assholes reflect on all men. I don't think all men are this way, obviously. Well, not obviously to some people who think that's what I think. And so it makes me feel bad when you do feel guilty about this sort of behavior. And I do recognize that sort of the hate reflects on them more than it reflects on me. And some days I can totally deal with it. There's some days when I'll write a post and I'll make fun of something, some mean thing someone said, and I legitimately mean it. Like, it really didn't affect me, and I just think it's ludicrous, and often I try to use humor to laugh it off. That's my defense mechanism, that I'm just gonna laugh at how ridiculous this is that you would waste 5 minutes of your life to call me these awful things in the morning. Like, it's your loss. But it's also one of those things, it just makes you weary. It drags you down when you get it so much. Even if down in my gut, I logically know that what they're saying isn't true, that what they're saying to me is because they see what I'm doing as threatening, and maybe that shows that I'm doing something good. I can tell myself that enough, but sometimes the bad outweighs that, just because I'm human. And when someone's saying horrible things to you every day, you know, it gets to you after a while. But the one thing I do have to say is, you know, if this stuff pisses you off, please be vocal about it. Greta Christina, who's an awesome writer, I love her. She's a good friend too. Gets lots of my tweets when I'm feeling crappy about the blogosphere. She wrote about diversity a while ago and saying that as an LGBT, as a bisexual woman, that she felt welcome in the atheist community because if anyone ever said something homophobic, there would be 100 straight people in the comments defending it, or breaking it down, defending LGBT people and saying, no, this is why you're wrong, this is why this is inappropriate. And she said her and her wife felt so welcome because of that, that's why they made the atheist community her home. She wasn't originally an atheist activist. She wrote about sex a lot. But now she primarily does atheist activism because it made her feel so welcome. And the same thing applies to sexism, in that even if you're a guy, please speak out about the sexism you're seeing. It might not silence the haters. You can only block so many people. I can't have people read through my emails, so I never see anything bad that's said about me. Like, there's an extent that I'm just gonna have to bear the brunt of some of this. But having that support really helps. And for a long time, I didn't have that support. I mean, I'd have some people in the comments speaking up, but the comments were always super negative, overwhelmingly. And it's actually kind of surprised me because after I wrote my post saying I'm taking a break for a little while, I'll be back to the blogosphere eventually, but right now I can't take it. I got so many emails and so many comments and so many thousands, literally total, of people saying, I've never commented before, but I love your blog, it's changed my life. I mean, I started crying when I read that. I didn't know, because not everyone speaks up. Not everyone tells you that they're supporting you and that they're against these sort of hate. And you hear the hate more than you hear the positive comments. So if you know a blogger or activist out there who's been getting this sort of crap, please just send them an email. It can be a sentence, it doesn't have to be long. But we need allies, especially men, saying that we don't accept this stuff either, and we're sorry you have to deal with it. And I think that's one of the main ways we can start to combat this sort of stuff, because we need our allies out there, or it does get to us. So hearing people say stuff like you just said, that means a lot. And I was saying this in the car ride over that, so I wrote this post saying I was taking a break a couple days ago, and it's not a publicity stunt. I felt pretty crappy, and I know people won't believe that unless, like, I don't know, my boyfriend videotapes me every time I'm crying or angry and puts it on the internet. Like, I don't know how to prove it. And I admit I was dreading this a little bit just because I knew everyone would want to ask me about it. I knew this was the topic I was planning on talking about, and there was part of me where I'm like, I just want to take that vacation, take a break. But, you know, I committed to come here, and I love speaking to local groups, and I'm not going to make you refund my plane ticket. That'd be kind of mean. And when I showed up, and we got dinner and drinks last night, and we talked about what your local groups are doing, and how some of you are already totally on board with this issue, and just how nice you guys treated me, it really recharged me. It makes me want to come back even sooner, because I know that a lot of the hate I get is part of the internet. It's part of that culture where you're anonymous and you say things you usually don't say. And it gives me a lot of hope to know that a lot of the in-person groups that are really out there and doing the stuff in the field and doing all the activism, not just like me, a keyboard activist. I guess I'm more than a keyboard activist, but mostly a keyboard activist. It really helps. It really does make me feel better being here. So, you know, keep being supportive, keep doing what you're doing, and lend that voice of support and let people you know that you care about these things. Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, I would like you to think about in terms of the noise you're making is really, really important, and the fact that you deal with an anti-oppressive agenda is stirring stuff up. And these people are feeling threatened, and their fearfulness is what's making them respond to you that way. And one measure of the importance of the work that you're doing is that response. So, good work, good job.
Thank you. I guess I should repeat that, even though it's weird to repeat praise for myself, but that the sort of hate response I get is sort of a measure of good I'm doing, I guess. And I think you're right. I've said that myself, that this is sort of the death throes of a faction, that they get louder and louder when they know they're being pushed out. And I think that's what happened with Atheism Plus too, that they saw the enthusiasm behind it. They saw how many people are saying, I'm getting back in, I'm caring about this, I'm being active, and we're not tolerating these people anymore. And I think they saw that, oh crap, I'm the one who's going to get pushed out really soon and not have this community because I'm treating people like crap. So I think you're right to an extent. But again, it's hard to rationally tell yourself that on lowest days. So that's why the support really matters. Yeah.
So I'll add to that, and to get all from my privileged class. And in that, this has been an opportunity for me to learn more about privilege. Because I reacted wrong to a television game. I learned I did. You guys.
Thank you.
Maybe it's a chance to teach future documents.
Maybe, I hope so. No, and I think that's one of the things that so many people don't get. Like, I'm privileged. I'm a middle-class white lady in the U.S. I identify as straight. I have lots of parts of me that I don't have to think about walking down, driving my car and getting pulled over just because of the color of my skin. I don't have to think about stuff like that. I have to think about sexist issues a lot, which is why that's what I primarily talk about, just because I understand it more, I relate to it more. And, you know, there were things that I was privileged about too, and I try to bring this up as much as possible. I was saying this earlier to someone that a couple years ago, when I started getting into the blog scene, I subscribed to a lot of feminist blogs because I consider myself a feminist, and why not? And there were a lot of ideas out there that I was like, oh, these crazy feminists, they're just humorless, and why are they overreacting? This isn't actually a problem. And I had this kind of the same reaction a lot of people are having now, but I feel the difference between how I reacted and how they reacted is that even though I was initially defensive, like a lot of people get, I shut up and listened. I sat there and said, I don't agree with this, but I don't know why it's making me so angry, so I'm going to just sit and think about this a little bit. And I kept reading those blogs, and I kept reading the commentary, and eventually, for some issues, not all, I mean, not all feminists agree on the same things, I changed my mind, and I realized that some of these things are issues. And the same thing happened with race. I know the first time someone said that I had white privilege, my instinctual reaction was, I don't hate black people. I love all races. I'm not racist. What are you saying I'm doing? And it hurt me because, like I said earlier, you think of racists as bad people, and you think you're a good person, so obviously they're wrong, and you're not racist about anything. And then I think the Avenue Q song is pretty good about that, but everyone's a little bit racist. And it's about identifying that and trying to make the situation better, and also understanding that, you know, a lot of the stuff that has to do with privilege in our society is a cultural thing, and it's not you actively doing something bad. But it's about making that step of saying, oh, yeah, this is a thing, it's not necessarily my fault, but I'll try to go the extra mile to make it better for other people. And so I think that is great, that you're willing to change your mind. And I get that a lot, actually. I get way more emails from people who say they're feminists now because of all the writing that I've done or Greta's done than people who say they're atheists now. I get those too occasionally. But people do change their mind, and sometimes it usually takes a long time. Usually in those emails they say it took a couple of years of reading before it kind of clicked. But I think that willingness to think that you might be wrong about something and hear what other people have to say is something our movement should really embrace if we really want to be skeptical and rational. Yeah, in the back.
Just to that point, I want to recommend a book by a man named John Howard Griffin called Black Like Me, which when I read it really opened my eyes to how easy it can be to miss that privilege that you have. He was a white guy who dyed his skin to a black color and then traveled through 1958 and 1959 Southeast America, and just to kind of see what it was like to be a black person, and really opened his eyes to the kind of privilege he enjoyed as a white man. So if you really want to get an example of what it's like to learn about that, that's a really great book to read.
Sure.
I just want to say, when I saw the meetup for this event and the description about, you know, you're promoting Atheism Plus, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know who you were. But my recent involvement with local atheist groups, free thinkers, and I was involved a little bit with the Occupy Kansas City initially, and came this kind of issue with, okay, you're opening yourself up to having people come in and discuss these issues, and you want to be inclusive, but you know, at some point you have to, there's lines that have to be drawn there, and since atheism doesn't really, in and of itself, that doesn't tell you anything about someone, we had kind of dealt with that a little bit. It's like someone wanted a Christian person had, you know, possibly come to one of our free thinker meetings. How would we deal with that? Well, as long as they weren't disruptive, yeah, we're okay. But so when I read the description that you were interested in inclusive atheism, I just said yes, 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 and that was before I knew anything about you or about the feminist movement. I've had a little bit of knowledge about some of the issues that have been going on with, I knew about Rebecca Watson, but I'd not delved into it deeply. But since then, I've logged on to the forum that you created, and you know, all other things aside, we really need to lay down the marker, as far as I'm concerned, that atheists, you know, we're atheists who are progressive and inclusive, and we don't tolerate intolerance. So,
and hearing that makes me so happy because that's why I tried to make the Atheism Plus website. People who maybe weren't already tapped in could go and join it, participate, and talk about these issues that we care about. And yeah, I just think it's so important because we've seen this happen with every previous social justice movement, diversity issues, and like you said, it's not just atheism. The Occupy movement might have similar issues, and you know, the early feminists were really transphobic and kind of racist, and they didn't deal with that early on, and so a lot of trans women and women of color are a little skeptical of the feminist movement, a little distrustful because they didn't deal with that issue early. Same with the GLBT movement. It was really male-dominated by gay men, and so a lot of lesbians didn't feel like they really were involved in that movement. And so I really see this as our chance that we're still a baby movement. We're still, like, we've been growing so rapidly that it's amazing. I mean, just look at the Reason Rally this year. It was awesome. But we need to nip this in the bud now, and so that's why I feel like promoting this sort of stuff is so important to get people on board, so more people know that, okay, maybe not all atheists are inclusive, but here's the group you can go to if you want to know you're in a safe space and that we care about you. So, yeah. Any other questions? Random comments? Sure.
So, you've mentioned a lot about the online harassment. How much of that has actually translated to real life, or between you and anybody else you know in real life, or anything like that?
Sure. It's definitely worse on the internet. I've had some of it in real life, unfortunately. It's definitely worse online. Like I said, I think the whole anonymity and culture of the internet really encourages people to say things they wouldn't say to your face. I think when you're talking to someone in person, it humanizes them more. They remember I'm just some dorky grad student who likes to write and really cares about these things, and that I'm not actually some evil feminazi pope that's like scheming to like take over the atheist movement or something. But I have had some of it happen in real life. I had a meetup I went to in Seattle. It was one of my first times when I moved there from Indiana. And I should say, I love the Seattle atheists. They're awesome. Group as a whole, super supportive of me. They even said, like, we're on board with Atheism Plus. Let us know if you can do anything. But my first experience going to one of their like pub meetups, a guy was sitting across from me, and all of a sudden he starts holding his phone up to me, and I'm like, what are you doing? I was thinking maybe he's like taking a picture of me or something. He's like, oh, I'm just comparing you to your boobquake photo to see what it looks like in real life. And I'm like, can you not do that? It's kind of uncomfortable. And the guy next to him turns and says, it's not sexual harassment if it's not in the workplace. Oh yeah, it was great. And you know what? The problem at the time was that there were other guys at the table. I was the only woman there. And no one said anything. And I was just sitting there stunned into silence. Like I literally could not come up with a response because I was so stunned that someone would say that to me. And afterwards, multiple people who were there and heard it sent me an email saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't speak up at the time. I didn't know what to say either. I was afraid maybe they'd push me out or something, but that was inappropriate. And so I appreciated that. But it's one of those things that you need to speak up when things happen, or this one kind of jerk can ruin it for everyone. I mean, what if I wasn't someone who's already super tapped into the atheist movement and, like, I don't know, I guess I have a thicker skin than most. I don't think that's a judge of character. I just, some people can deal with it, and other people don't want to waste their time and energy dealing with it, and that's totally cool. But if I wasn't already tapped in, I probably wouldn't have gone back. I'd be like, these atheist jerks, and, you know, leave. But, you know, they took care of it. I think those guys were a fluke and, like, never showed up again, so that was really nice. I didn't have to deal with them anymore. Like I said, I mean, when I was talking about boobquake at conferences, people would constantly come up to me and be like, oh, great talk, and it's so great that you're hot too, so you get more guys in the atheist movement, because that's what we need, more straight guys, because we don't have a lot of them already. And, you know, just making comments and leering at my chest. I've had friends who go to conferences and speakers try to feel them up or follow them to a hotel room when they say no. You know, it happens in real life. I think the internet's way worse than what happens in person. But I think, you know, speaking up more about it will help. And when you see those things, even if they're rarer in person, just kind of try to nip it in the bud when it happens. Yeah.
All right, so I kind of have a comment more than a question. But I think I appreciate everything you said, and I agree with you. I guess, again, this is just really more an added that I have to say about it. I think there's definitely there's a significant amount of people that, not to, you know, mischaracterize what you said, that needs to be pushed out. Like there's some not great people that have not great ideas that the movement would not be liking at all if they were just maybe not a part of it. The people you wouldn't invite over to dinner. But I genuinely think that there are some people that ideas who could improve, who are well-meaning, and just like maybe just patience and polite education. And I feel like I've received earnest questions from people who, you know, again, aren't trying to be condescending or aren't trying to shoot down ideas, but are just earnestly, well, what is appropriate conduct and what does make someone feel comfortable or uncomfortable? And I'm sure you as well, like super appreciate that and welcome that. And maybe people who are not maybe as polite, you know, just educating people. And I know, you know, as someone who grew up in a small, predominantly white environment, like, you know, being around more diverse groups of people, I've had to curb behavior and correct things that weren't appropriate. And yeah, sometimes those growing pains are uncomfortable, but I guess I'm appreciative of the patience that people had with me. And I'm more than happy to extend, I don't know, I guess it just, some of it is people who could just benefit from increasing their knowledge.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why for the Atheism Plus website we're trying to focus on that a lot. We're trying to have links to educational resources so you can learn, like, what is feminism, what is privilege, and try to have really calm, rational discussions about it. That's why part of our forum is an educational forum where the questions there are basic questions from people who genuinely maybe don't get something but want to learn more. And it's the one part of the forum where we're moderating tone, where you have to be nice and calm and not jump to conclusions that the person is actually just trying to derail you or something like that. So I think that's super important. And one of the reasons why we have that specific forum for it is I know not everyone's good at that. Not everyone's good at being patient. And I admit sometimes I'm not good at that, especially when you hear the same thing over and over again and when certain things are specifically said not earnestly and are meant to sort of derail discussion. It makes you suspicious, like, does this person actually want an answer, or are they just being a jerk, and that sort of stuff. That's why we want to have that educational forum, so people who have questions can get them answered in a way that's not hostile. And I think it works. It's like I said, I have more people emailing me saying they're feminists now than an atheist now. And so there are obviously people who are changing their minds about these things. And yeah, I think this is a great chance to get more allies and get more people educated about these issues, about applying skepticism to everything. So I think you're totally right. And there's some of us who are terrible at it. I have some commenters that maybe it makes me smile a little when they take someone down, but they really shouldn't be doing it. You know, they get too angry, they get too snarky, too mean, and it's not productive when you're trying to educate someone. So I think it's really important that we try to be calm even if sometimes we fail. Sure.
May I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Some years went by and all of a sudden I became an old white man. I remember saying once to my mother when I was in my 50s that when I don't look in a mirror, I still feel 29. And her response to me was, when I don't look in a mirror, I still feel 29. I'm married to a feminist, and there are some of us old white men who say, go for it, do what you do. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you. And I my dad's an old white man. I love him very much. And yeah, and it hurts me when people say that I hate older white men because I don't. And I know some of them are supporters, that most of them are supporters. And it's really not about excluding that type of person. It's about including everyone else. It's not about being like, no more Richard Dawkins in the movement. No, it's about they contribute a lot, and we want everyone to contribute a lot too. So thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I have, if I may, real quick, I think one of the things that's helpful for me is keeping the concepts of what and how. They're very related, but they're also very separate. You know, what am I, and then how do I do that? And I think when we're talking about how do we deal with the people that are hurtful, we have to come up with a process for them to go to the corner and then maybe come back. There are some people that need to go and never come back. And then there's people that, because it's a process for them too, as they, you know, as a person wrestles with their sexism, with their racism, you know, but that's a journey. But they've got to earn that, like,
And I totally agree, and I think that's one thing some people don't do really well is that that they kind of demonize a person forever if they've ever said something wrong. I mean, Richard Dawkins comes out and says, that Dear Muslima thing was kind of problematic. I'm sorry. I will accept that apology. I'd be elated if he said that. I'm like, yes, thank you. Just as an example, I was speaking at the American Atheist Rapture Ram. I don't even remember what that was, a year ago or so, during the Herald campings. We're all going to get raptured, which was fun because right when the rapture happened, an earthquake hit the conference. Very most nervous I've ever seen a room full of atheists. Everyone was like, no, you're right. And one of the speakers there made a comment during his talk how it's great that we have a video blogger like Christina Rad because she's so hot and she gets more guys into the movement. And I called him out on that after his talk in the Q&A, and at the time he kind of hunkered down, he was like, didn't expect to be called out on that. And a day or so later, he wrote me a sincere apology and explained why he understood what he said was wrong, that he would change his behavior in the future, and it was very sincere. And I publicly posted it on my blog, saying thank you for understanding that. And I think that's something we need to get better at, or keep doing for the people who are already good at it. That there are people who, again, it's going to take time, they're going to mess up, but when they sort of get it, and when they recognize they're wrong, if they ever apologize, we have to be ready to accept that, and not just keep demonizing them for their past behavior. Because no one's perfect. I mean, I've said stuff in the past that I don't agree with anymore, and that was wrong. So I think that's an excellent point, that we need to be able to do that. Do you have a question?
Well, what I was going to say was, you have a witness test for these kinds of people. Because, okay, so you're talking about that woman on Twitter who then posted a comment about, I'm a woman and this has never happened to me. So therefore, it doesn't happen to anyone. I don't really understand your rationality. So she went on to write this whole blog post all about it. There's all these people tweeting her blog post and saying, how much they agree with her. My response to her is, your experience is not representative. Your experience is not universal. How do you get people like that to open their minds and understand? And I think that Richard Dawkins in his response is in the same group as this woman. They just don't seem to understand that what they're experiencing is not the same as everyone else.
Yeah, it's really a type of hyper-skepticism in that, well, I don't believe any of these stories you're telling, Jen, because you don't have video evidence of people sexually harassing you. Like, I've heard comments like that. Like, until you have photographs of someone doing this, then it didn't happen. Yes, anecdotes aren't evidence, but there's a certain point in your life where we're not going to put mics on every woman at every atheist conference trying to catch those sexist people. Like, we just practically can't come up with that video evidence of stuff like that happening. The weird thing is we have lots of evidence of the online things people write, and they still happen to ignore those things. I think part of it is just keep talking about it, and keep saying stuff like you just said. Your experiences, that's not everyone else's experience. People go through different things in their life, and that's great. I'm so happy that there's a woman who's not been sexually harassed in the atheist movement. I wish everyone was like that. And it doesn't just diminish her experience to be able to talk about mine. As for getting through to them, I don't know. If I had the magic bullet, I'd be using it all the time. But I think just talking about it, because some people do change their mind. I mean, you've heard it here, I hear it all the time, that, I disagree with you in the beginning, and then the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was wrong. And it takes people a while to come to that conclusion. But for a litmus test, I mean, there's some things I don't tolerate, and I'll just outright block people. If someone's calling me a cunt or a feminazi or something just ludicrous, it's like, I'm not going to interact with you. Like, I don't have the time and effort to try to change your mind. But if someone has a misconception or something they heard somewhere else, which is happening a lot because there are a group of people who are really obsessive about kind of twisting my words and twisting the words of people who agree with me and spread a lot of misinformation, saying things that, they're saying things that I didn't say but trying to make it seem like I said it. Those people I'll engage. I'll be like, actually, I didn't say that. This is what I believe. It's like, actually, no, I don't want to exclude men from the movement. I think everyone should be included. Stuff like that. So I think for when it's just a misconception, it's worth at least addressing once. But, it takes time and you only have so much energy out there. So you can't hold their hand the whole way of the process. You can't comment on every single blog post they write. You can't talk to them every single day of the year. Part of it is your own journey. I can't force you to stop being sexist, just like you can't go force someone to be an atheist. You can plant that seed of doubt. You can plant that seed of, hey, this is why I believe what I believe, and here's the evidence for it, but you have to kind of let those people go, figure it out, and do that journey on their own a little bit. So, anything else? Sure.
Odd question. As a scientist, and you have a cluster of raw data in your hate mail, have you ever considered mapping out what type of articles is more likely to get you called a bitch versus a
No, but now I'm going to. I do know when I write about feminism, I get more mean things said to me. So, and though I should do a statistical test, but that would involve going back and reading through like thousands and thousands of mean comments. So I don't know if I should do that. Maybe I should enlist some other scientists to do that. But
give it to an intern.
Blogging intern. Go figure out which hate speech is used most against me. Anything else? Thanks for having me, you guys.